a young mother of two, was found dead inside her own beauty salon. Investigators explored countless leads and looked into nearly everyone in their small town as a potential suspect. Yet every trail seemed to end in a dead end. For 10 long years, the case remained unsolved until a series of completely unexpected events suddenly breathed new life into the investigation. What those events uncovered would reveal a shocking truth that had been hidden all along. Hey everyone, if you're enjoying these true crime stories, make sure to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any new cases. I post the most interesting and shocking criminal stories here, so stay tuned for more. Now, let's continue with the story. Dana Satterfield was born on November 16, 1967, in the small American town of Spartanburg. She grew up in a loving, religious family and was known from an early age for her kind and outgoing personality. Making friends came naturally to Dana, and she was always willing to help others, never hesitating to give her time and energy. She also developed a strong interest in beauty and cosmetology, which eventually inspired her to pursue a career as a hairstylist. After working in several beauty salons, Dana became certain that this was the path she wanted to follow. By then, she was living in the small town of Roebuck, which bordered her hometown of Spartanburg. Not long after graduating from high school, Dana married a young man named Mike. Over the years, the couple welcomed 2 children, a daughter and a son. Determined to build something of her own, Dana spent several years saving money to open a beauty salon. It had always been her dream. Eventually, her hard work paid off, and she launched her own small business, a place she hoped would become the foundation of a bright future for her family. However, keeping the salon running demanded almost all of Dana's time and energy. By the summer of 1995, at just 27 years old, she was still working long hours, doing her best to balance her growing business with raising 2 young children. Then, on July 31st, everything changed. At around 8 o'clock p.m., police received a call from a woman named Diana. She explained that she had been standing near Dana's beauty salon waiting for a ride, when she suddenly heard strange noises coming from inside the building. The lights were off, but dull thuds and banging sounds could be heard from within. Moments later, there was a loud crash. To Diana's shock, she saw a man climb through a window and jump out of the salon before quickly fleeing the scene. Diana knew Dana personally, so she immediately contacted the police to report what she had witnessed. Just a few hours earlier, at approximately 6:30 p.m., she had stopped by the salon and sold Dana a set of cleaning supplies. At that time, everything had seemed perfectly normal. About 20 minutes before calling the police, Diana had walked past the salon once again. At that time, the lights were still on inside. Through the window, she saw Dana cleaning up at the end of the day. Dana even waved to her as she passed by. Because of that, Diana assumed Dana had already left, and that someone had simply broken into the salon. Since she didn't have a cell phone with her, she rushed into a nearby store to call 911. To her surprise, the very same man she had seen climbing out of the salon window entered the store moments later. He glanced at her briefly before turning around and leaving. Diana then completed her call to the police. An officer who was already in the area responded to the scene, expecting to investigate what appeared to be a routine burglary. What he discovered, however, was far beyond anything he had anticipated. Entering the dark salon, the officer began searching the building with a flashlight. At first, everything seemed normal. There were no obvious signs of trouble. But when he stepped into a storage room at the back of the salon, he found Dana. Part of her clothing was missing, and her body showed numerous signs of a violent struggle. Yet the most disturbing detail was something else entirely. A belt had been fastened around her neck, with the other end tied to a water heater. As a result, Dana's body was suspended slightly above the floor. In an instant, what had seemed like a possible break-in became the scene of a brutal homicide. The officer immediately called for backup, and soon investigators began processing the crime scene. In a town as small as theirs, nearly everyone knew everyone else, and the responding officers recognized Dana right away. Because part of her clothing was missing, detectives initially considered the possibility that the attacker had sexually assaulted her. At the same time, they quickly ruled out robbery as the primary motive. Cash and other valuables inside the salon had been left untouched. The sheer brutality of the crime also pointed investigators in a different direction. This did not look like a random break-in gone wrong. Instead, the violence suggested that the killer may have had a personal connection to the victim. While forensic specialists searched the salon for fingerprints, DNA, and any other evidence that could identify the attacker, officers interviewed Diana in greater detail. There was little doubt in their minds that the man she had seen climbing out of the salon window was directly connected to the murder. Fortunately, Diana had gotten a second look at the suspect when he unexpectedly entered the nearby store. Although the encounter lasted only a few moments, it gave her enough time to notice several important details. Based on her description, investigators created a composite sketch. The suspect was believed to be a young white male, approximately 5 feet 9 inches 175 centimeters tall, wearing a grey t-shirt and jeans. Diana was also able to provide a surprisingly detailed description of his facial features, allowing a police artist to produce a highly accurate sketch, with a potential witness, a detailed composite drawing, and what appeared to be a clear suspect. Investigators believed they were already on the path to solving Dana's murder. They had no idea how long and frustrating the road ahead would become. What made the situation even more puzzling was that, despite the town's small size, Diana did not recognize the man in the sketch. As a door-to-door saleswoman who sold cleaning products, Diana spent her days traveling throughout the community and interacting with countless local residents. She knew many people in town by face and by name, yet she was certain she had never seen this man before. Investigators quickly distributed the composite sketch throughout the area and searched for anyone matching the description. Despite their efforts, the lead went nowhere. Detectives then turned their attention to Dana's appointment book. According to her schedule, her last recorded client had left several hours before the murder. Based on Diana's testimony, Dana had still been inside the salon about 20 minutes before her death, cleaning up and preparing to close for the evening. This suggested that the killer had entered the salon shortly before closing time, attacked her almost immediately, dragged her into the storage room, and staged the scene by fastening the belt to the water heater. While processing the crime scene, forensic investigators discovered a single fingerprint on the water heater. The finding seemed significant. Since the killer had tied the belt to the appliance, investigators believed he must have touched its surface during the attack. If so, the fingerprint could belong to the murderer. Detectives began examining Dana's inner circle and soon learned that she and her husband, Mike, had recently started living separately, though they had not yet filed for divorce. As is common in cases involving violent crimes, investigators requested Mike's fingerprints for comparison. The results immediately caught their attention. The fingerprint found on the water heater matched Mike. At first glance, it appeared to be a major breakthrough. But the more detectives looked into the evidence, the more questions emerged. During interviews, Mike stated that on the evening of the murder he had been at home taking care of the children. As investigators dug deeper into his timeline, they found reasons to wonder whether the fingerprint really pointed to a killer, or whether it was leading them in the wrong direction entirely. Mike's children, who were 8 and 6 years old at the time, confirmed that their father had stayed home with them that evening and had not gone anywhere. In addition, Mike did not fit the witness's description particularly well. He was a large, heavy-set man, and investigators had difficulty imagining him climbing through, let alone jumping out of the salon window as Diana had described. As detectives spoke with Dana's family and friends, they learned that she and Mike had indeed been experiencing problems in their marriage and were living separately. However, everyone they interviewed told a similar story. Despite their difficulties, the couple remained on good terms and were trying to preserve the relationship for the sake of their children. Mike also agreed to take a polygraph examination, and the examiner reported no signs of deception. He explained the fingerprint on the water heater by stating that he had personally installed the unit years earlier and regularly repaired it, along with other equipment in the salon. Taking all of this into account, investigators gradually concluded that Mike was unlikely to be involved in Dana's murder, and shifted their attention elsewhere. Soon afterward, forensic specialists reported another important discovery. Investigators had recovered a second fingerprint from the salon, this one left in blood. DNA testing confirmed that the blood belonged to Dana, meaning the fingerprint had almost certainly been left by the killer during the attack. It seemed like a crucial piece of evidence. Unfortunately, the print did not match anyone in law enforcement databases, and comparisons with Dana's relatives, friends, and associates produced no results. A few days later, the medical examiner delivered the final autopsy report. Dana had died from strangulation. Her body also showed numerous bruises and abrasions consistent with a violent physical assault. The examination further confirmed that she had been sexually assaulted, and investigators were able to recover biological evidence left behind by the attacker. Under normal circumstances, this might have provided a direct path to identifying the killer, but in 1995, investigators faced a major obstacle. The National FBI DNA database did not yet exist in a form that could be used the way it is today. Detectives could not simply upload a DNA profile and wait for a match. Instead, they had to collect DNA samples from individual suspects and compare them manually against the evidence recovered from the crime scene. Police began obtaining samples from numerous men connected to the investigation, but each comparison ended in disappointment. Days passed with no breakthrough. Then a new witness came forward. A man named Ken told investigators that he had driven past Dana's salon on the night of the murder and noticed something unusual. First, he saw that the salon appeared dark, even though Dana's car was still parked outside. The second thing that caught his attention was a man standing near a white and blue Ford Bronco, parked beside a neighboring business. At the time, Ken thought little of it, but after hearing about the murder and seeing the composite sketch released by police, he began to wonder whether what he had witnessed that night was far more important than he had realized. The problem was that Ken worked at the neighboring establishment and knew it was already closed at that time, which made the presence of an unfamiliar man in the parking lot seem suspicious. He also recalled that the man appeared agitated and aggressive, staring directly at him without looking away until Ken drove past. According to his statement, this occurred at approximately 8:40 p.m., meaning it was after the time of the murder. This detail gave investigators a new lead, a possible vehicle associated with the killer. Of course, detectives could not be certain that the man Ken had seen was directly involved in the crime, but at that point, it was one of the only tangible leads they had. Police began reviewing owners of similar vehicles in the area. Among them, they identified several individuals who raised suspicion and could not be ruled out completely. However, none of them could be definitively linked to the crime either. Months passed, and with each day that went by, investigators grew more uncertain that they would ever identify the killer. For the residents of the small town, the case became a heavy burden. The idea that a violent murderer could be living among them while remaining unidentified created a growing sense of fear and unease. As the investigation slowly ran out of momentum, people in the town tried to help in any way they could. Calls to 911 regularly came in from witnesses who believed they had spotted a Ford Bronco matching the description on the streets. Even Dana's children had been made aware of the search. Whenever they noticed a similar vehicle, they would inform their father, Mike, hoping it might help the investigation. But none of these tips led anywhere. That was until months after the murder, when the case had nearly gone cold. Police received an unexpected phone call from prison. An inmate claimed that his cellmate, a man named Russell Quinn, might be responsible for Dana's murder. According to him, Russell frequently talked about knowing the victim and often mentioned how beautiful she was. The inmate also alleged that Russell possessed a photograph of Dana, and at one point even implied that he had committed the murder. Investigators began looking into Russell Quinn and discovered that he had been free at the time of Dana's death. He was later incarcerated for a separate sexual offense. One detail immediately caught their attention. In that previous case, the victim had been tied to a tree similar, in a disturbing way, to how Dana had been bound to the water heater at the crime scene. Police also learned that Russell drove a similar vehicle to the one described by witnesses, and bore a resemblance to the composite sketch. A photo lineup was assembled, including Russell and 5 other men, and shown to Diana, the witness who had seen the attacker. After reviewing the images, Diana identified Russell as the man she had seen that night. With what seemed like a strong lead, detectives sent Russell's DNA to the lab for comparison with the evidence recovered from the crime scene. But the results delivered an unexpected twist. There was no match. Investigators had been convinced they were finally closing in on the killer. But once again the case collapsed. From that point on, the investigation stalled. Over time, the case faded into the background and was effectively shelved. Years passed, and with each passing year, Dana's loved ones lost more hope that her killer would ever be found. Even her children began to doubt that justice would ever come. 10 years went by. By then, Dana's daughter Ashley had turned 18 and started college. One ordinary day, Ashley stopped by a local auto repair shop for a routine oil change, and without realizing it, she was about to take the first step toward reopening the truth about her mother's murder. And that moment became the trigger that effectively revived the investigation into her mother's murder. While Ashley stood outside the auto repair shop waiting for her car, one of the mechanics mentioned to his co-workers that she bore a striking resemblance to Dana, who had been killed 10 years earlier. The others told him that she was Dana's daughter. The mechanic was visibly surprised. He hadn't known that the victim had any children. The thought stayed with him, and over time it grew into a feeling of guilt, not because he had any involvement in Dana's murder, but because he believed he might know the name of the person who did. 10 years earlier, when he was just 17 years old, he had called the police anonymously and reported that a 17-year-old boy named Jonathan Vick might be responsible for Dana's murder. Back then, investigators looked into Jonathan and discovered that his mother owned a white and blue Ford Bronco and that Jonathan had been driving it on the night of the murder. However, his mother firmly refused to allow police to speak with her son or inspect the vehicle. She insisted that he had nothing to do with the crime, and demanded that investigators leave her family alone. Detectives attempted to obtain a warrant to collect Jonathan's DNA and fingerprints, but the judge denied the request, citing the lack of reliable evidence beyond an anonymous tip. With no legal grounds to proceed, investigators were forced to step back. Now, 10 years later, the same former mechanic came forward again. He repeated everything he had said before, but this time, he was once again determined to remain anonymous. Investigators explained to him that without a name and official testimony, there was little they could do. In the end, he realized that only by stepping forward could justice possibly be achieved. The man, now 27 years old, was named Michael Pace, and he agreed to tell police everything he knew. According to Michael, on the night of the murder, he had been given a ride home by his friend Jonathan in a white and blue Ford Bronco, belonging to Jonathan's mother. During the drive, Jonathan suddenly said he was going to get a haircut that night. Michael found the statement strange, especially since it was already late in the evening. But Jonathan replied that he wasn't going for a haircut for its own sake. He was going there for Dana. He was a regular customer at the salon, just like his mother, since both of them knew Dana personally and trusted her services. During that drive, Jonathan began talking about how beautiful Dana was and how he wanted to have an intimate relationship with her. Michael assumed he was joking, especially because Jonathan was about 10 years younger than Dana, and he responded with a nervous smile. Jonathan's expression changed immediately. He became visibly angry and asked something along the lines of, "Do you really doubt I could do it?" At the time, Michael still believed it was just a dark joke, so he didn't press the conversation further. The next day, When news reports announced Dana's murder, Michael refused to believe that his friend could possibly be involved. But everything changed when police began publicly searching for a white Ford Bronco. Michael started to realize that Jonathan might actually be connected to the crime. The situation escalated after another encounter between them. According to Michael, Jonathan directly threatened him, saying he would kill him if he ever told anyone about that night. That was the moment Michael decided to make the anonymous call to the police. He was terrified for his life, but at the same time he could no longer live with what he knew. 10 years later, it was Dana's children that finally pushed him to come forward. Thinking about what it must have been like for them to grow up without their mother, Michael overcame his fear and agreed to reveal his identity. With a named witness finally cooperating, a judge approved a warrant to collect Jonathan's DNA. By that time, Jonathan was living in Greenville, about half an hour from the scene of Dana's murder. Since those early years, he had served 2 years in the Marine Corps, later started a family, and had a wife and daughter. Over the years, however, he struggled to maintain stable employment. He was frequently fired due to his volatile temper and constant conflicts with co-workers and supervisors. While he had no major criminal record, he had previously been arrested twice for vandalism and domestic violence. Though both cases were eventually dismissed, police collected his DNA, and soon forensic experts confirmed a match. The biological evidence recovered from Dana's body belonged to Jonathan. Jonathan continued to deny any involvement in the murder, insisting that he had never even known the victim. But the evidence told a different story. When officers arrested him in front of cameras and reporters, he stated, "I love my wife and daughter. That's all that matters." Throughout the following interrogations, he maintained his denial. But investigators had already gathered enough evidence to move the case forward to trial. Based on all the available evidence, detectives reconstructed their final version of events. That night, Jonathan did indeed go to Dana's salon, just as he had told his friend. Most likely, he used the haircut as a pretext to enter the building, before shifting the conversation toward his sexual intentions. Dana may have dismissed his comments as a joke or simply rejected him outright. At that point, investigators believe he locked the front door from the inside, turned off the lights, and attacked her with his fists. Dana likely lost consciousness during the assault. Jonathan then dragged her into the storage room, where he sexually assaulted her and ultimately strangled her using a belt. One detail investigators still could not fully explain was why Jonathan chose to escape through a window instead of simply leaving through the front door. It was that desperate escape through the window that drew Diana's attention and ultimately led to the 911 call. Had Jonathan calmly exited through the front entrance, he may have noticed someone nearby and waited inside instead. But instead, he fled through the window, got into his vehicle parked nearby, and drove away. When police initially received the anonymous tip from his friend and attempted to collect Jonathan's DNA and fingerprints, they were blocked by his mother, who refused to allow any cooperation with the investigation. However, after the official testimony from Michael Pace and the confirmed DNA match, there was no longer any doubt. Investigators were prepared to move forward with charges against Jonathan. But just as the case seemed ready for trial, investigators uncovered another unexpected development. While reviewing Jonathan's background more closely, they discovered something disturbing. In 2002, 3 years before his arrest, Jonathan had been in a relationship with a woman named Heather. The two were even engaged at one point. However, that engagement was broken off in the fall of that year, and just 2 weeks later, Heather disappeared without a trace. Police later learned that she had continued seeing Jonathan up until her disappearance. The last time she was seen alive, the couple had visited to bars together. After that night, she was never seen again. Her car was later found at the bottom of a river, but Heather's body was never recovered. Friends and family described the relationship as highly unstable, and said Heather had repeatedly complained about Jonathan's violent behavior. Based on all of this, Jonathan remained the main suspect in the case, but investigators still struggled to formally establish every detail of his involvement beyond the available evidence. While preparations for Dana's trial were underway, police received yet another unexpected piece of information. During this time, Jonathan was being held in custody, and one of his cellmates contacted detectives. According to the inmate, Jonathan had said that if he could go back to any day of his life, it would be the day he went to Dana's salon. He also allegedly admitted that he parked his vehicle near a neighboring business because he did not want it seen outside the salon, and that he fled through the window because he was extremely frightened. The trial began in November 2006, 1 year after Jonathan's arrest. Jonathan continued to maintain his innocence, but with the accumulated evidence presented in court, the jury quickly reached a unanimous verdict. He was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison. During sentencing, he broke down in tears and claimed that the real killer was still out there and that justice had not been served. He retained the possibility of parole and became eligible to apply for release in 2035. However, his chances of early release are considered slim. While in prison, Jonathan assaulted a correctional officer, resulting in an additional 3-year sentence. This incident is expected to weigh heavily against him in any future parole hearings. It is also worth noting that after his arrest in the Dana case, investigators discovered an abandoned vehicle registered in his name. Inside, they found hair and what appeared to be blood stains. However, there was not enough evidence to conduct a definitive DNA analysis at the time. Nevertheless, investigators believe this discovery may be directly linked to the disappearance of Heather. If that is the case, Dana may not have been his only victim. That brings this case to a close, but many questions remain unanswered. What do you think about this story?